Let me take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this panel discussion, opening hiking trails in the Jamaican Blue Mountains, opportunities and challenges. I'm pleased to have been invited to moderate this online forum today, as I'm certain that the information delivered and examined will elicit a lively discussion and will also serve as a great learning opportunity for us all as we explore the challenges and opportunities presented by opening hiking trails in the mountains. Blue Mountains, as we know, has long held strong value for our island home, Jamaica, and remains largely untapped potential in terms of a contributor to the island's tourism. Hiking continues to grow in popularity among locals and foreigners seeking a different kind of Jamaican experience, where the Forestry Department can attest to the voracious local demand for more hikes based on the oversubscription of our annual forest trek. Introduced in 2011, we have taken thousands of hikers to explore various forested areas across the island. We are also advised that we have spawned several smaller hiking groups, which are actively capitalizing on the demand for more hikes. Our trekkers always relish the opportunity to explore our rugged trails and learn more about our cultural and ecological treasures. Blue Mountains are crisscrossed with a network of trails which connect villages with each other, as well as to farms, plantations, cultural and ecological sites. Through partners such as the JCBT, private tourism interests, community-based groups, all these wonders are now being shared with our visitors who walk, hike, and ride through our trails. Some of these trails remain inaccessible, but they provide a great opportunity for us to enhance the recreational and economic potential of the area through hiking and similar activities. This would happen while enhancing our efforts to prevent environmental damage and preserve ecosystems through managed use. The enhancement of this kind of local enterprise will not only significantly contribute to the national GDP, but more importantly, it will catalyze the improvement of the lives of our rural citizens. This through the economic empowerment that may arise from the operation of carefully planned and effectively operated hiking trails in the Blue Mountains. As we begin, please be advised that there will be no questions allowed during the presentations, and so I encourage you to note your questions for the question and answer session, and we will take all your questions at that time. Now, our first presenter this evening is none other than Dr. Susan Otuokan. Dr. Otuokan is the Executive Director of the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust, a non-government organization and a registered charity that manages the Blue and Jonker Mountains National Park and World Heritage Site. This on behalf of the various relevant government agencies. Dr. Otuokan has over 30 years work experience, mainly in the natural resources and protected areas management field in the NGO sector or as a consultant. She was awarded her PhD in 2010 by the University of the West Indies for her thesis, Ecotourism and its role as a tool for protected area management in the Caribbean, case studies from Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. The national park is over 41,000 hectares and its management includes a wide variety of activities within program areas such as natural heritage conservation, cultural heritage preservation, recreation and tourism, education, and public outreach. The Recreation and Tourism Program is guided by ecotourism principles, and hence JCDT, in addition to managing recreation areas at Hollowell, Portland Gap, and the Blue Mountain Peak Trail, facilitates sustainable tourism in the communities around the park. Dr. Otuokan has also been involved in national planning and policy development for the environmental management and tourism, and she has played a lead role in the 2015 inscription of the Blue and Jonker Mountains on the UNESCO World Heritage List, and in 2019, she was awarded the Bronze Musgrave Medal for Distinguished Eminence in Science by the Institute of Jamaica. Welcome, Dr. Otuokan.
Recording in progress.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And as I often do, if I can, I'm gonna try to share my screen here. And you will just need to tell me if you're seeing.
Yes, very clearly, Dr. O.
Okay, great. So let me just start the slides. Yes. So thanks again for the introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to have taken part in the planning and implementation of this joint panel discussion organized by JCDT and the Natural History Society of Jamaica, as we seek to further collaborate in protection of our natural heritage. Many of you might not realize, but JCDT, which was started in 1988, had several of our core founding directors from the Natural History Society, including Anne Sutton. I think I see Anne here, Professor Ivan Goodbody and Dr. Margaret Hodges, may they rest in peace, and Michael White, who still serves on our board. And so it's a particular pleasure to see the increasing collaboration. And of course, you're all familiar with the Natural History Society's guide to the Blue and John Crow Mountains. I am going to be, of course, sharing on the theme that has already been mentioned. I'm not going to share about biodiversity, how many plants and animals, etc. I'm not going to share about ecosystem services, water supply, things like that, or the cultural heritage, though all of these are rich and significant, but I believe you are all very familiar with those, and we want to allow time for each of the presenters. But what I would like to do is share some information that I find is not so familiar to many people, even those who are regular hikers within the Blue Mountains. First of all, a map of the area. A lot of people call us up from Irish Town or Millbank, Comfort Castle, and say, oh, are we in the national park? Or we are in the national park, please come and stop X activity from happening. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look at it, none of these communities, in fact, there are no communities, no living communities within the red line that you see here, which is the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park. It is set also on the Blue Mountain Forest Reserve, and the black lines you see around are other forest reserves. And it's also a protected national heritage, which does include some communities within the Rio Grande Valley, Scotts Hall, and Charlestown. So that's just to give you an idea where we're talking about. There's some blue lines there. It's not a river, it's a proposed hiking trail. So I wanted to share then some key points. Firstly, what do we do? What is managing a national park and World Heritage Site? It's about conservation management. But what does that entail? Secondly, what does it cost and how is this funded? Because there are certainly a lot of misconceptions about that. And then I will come to the opportunities and challenges which really flow from those issues. And then I will make some concluding remarks. So what do we do? What is this conservation management of the Blue and John Crow Mountains? I can't recall if it was indicated that it's 41,000 hectares, and the World Heritage Site, which is a core preservation zone within the national park, that's 26,000 hectares. So how do we manage this large site? Firstly, we have a management plan, and that was developed using a participatory approach involving community stakeholders, academia, different agencies and entities. And essentially, we tried to look at what are the threats and pressures that are degrading the values that we want to protect, the biodiversity, cultural heritage, the ecosystem services. And then we went further to look at what are the root causes of those threats and pressures, and what strategies and activities do we need to address those, because we don't want to just have a an activity that, or set of activities that will help to reduce the symptoms, we want to try to address the root causes. And I'm not going to go into the details, you can see them here. So we've identified some root causes of the threats to the natural and cultural heritage and the ecosystem services, and then we have several programs which try to address that through a number of activities, reforestation, um, education in schools, sustainable community livelihoods. What does this cost and how is it funded? Well, there's our ideal budget of 750,000 US, which is based on the Sustainable Financing Plan for Jamaica's System of Protected Areas produced by Mr. Galindo, a consultant from Latin America. And then you have the actual amount spent, which I think in 2019 was probably close to 500,000 US dollars, which sounds like a lot, but our real challenge is that was only in 2019. You can imagine 2020 and 2021, there's likely to have been a decrease, particularly due to COVID. But the fact is, it's less than what our ideal is. And the biggest challenge for us is that none of this is secured funding. So from year to year, we really do not know where our funds will come from. There are multiple sources: the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, NRCA, through the National Environment and Planning Agency, NEPO. We have the management fee because they have an agreement with us to manage the national park on their behalf, and that provides about 25% of the total budget. But 2021 to 22, that dropped to 15%. They also allow us to retain the legislated user fees for the recreation areas, and that provides maybe about 5%, and that's mainly really goes to operate the recreation areas, so specifically to that program. The recreation areas also generate additional funds through things like cabin rentals and tours, but again, that's only 10% of the total budget and is mainly to operate the recreation areas. A lot of people don't realize that it costs money to open trails, maintain picnic areas, etc. Then there's our donor-funded projects from a wide variety of organizations, local and abroad. And I won't go into those details, but that takes care of about 50 to 60% of our budget. And that dramatically increases or decreases every year, depending on how good we have been at proposal writing. And then there's a small amount from sponsorship, donations, and membership. So therefore, within that context of the reality of managing this site for us, we see reopening, and I'm saying reopening because many of you will have taken the Natural History Society's guide and tried to go out to discover these trails only to find that they're completely closed off because of overgrowth or regrowth of forest or invasive species, or there's a landslide blocking the trail. So for us, we are looking at reopening trails, but we have to consider that within the context of the site's recreation and tourism program, which focuses on using ecotourism principles. So in particular, we want to ensure income generation for the site. That's a reality for us. Sometimes people don't like to mention it, or the trails should be open to the public. Similarly with beaches, I won't get into that. That could be another whole argument, but there's a cost to maintenance. Benefits for local communities, we view that as extremely important, both income generation and employment opportunities. And we see the reopening of trails and the opening of trails as an opportunity to promote sustainable livelihoods to not only local community members, but people from further afield. What are the challenges? And these in particular are the following three items. So to mention access, of course, you need access for visitors to enjoy, explore, and experience. But at the same time, this also provides access for invasive species. And in the photo, we actually see two visitors going through a trail at Hollywell, and there is quite a bit of an invasive fern on the right-hand side. Fire is a big hazard. It can, as well as hurricanes and storms, can just use the trails as a pathway for destruction. And of course, people, no need to say much more about people there. They often have negative impacts. Widening the trails, erosion, yes, a lot of erosion on trails is really due to rainfall, and so drainage and maintenance is most critical. But there's also noise, disturbance of wildlife. Those of you who are bird watchers will know what I'm talking about. There is garbage. You've seen it on the Blue Mountain Peak Trail. You know, it's um, not nearly as bad as it could be in comparison to places I've seen elsewhere, but we do have a problem with garbage. Pests, including wildlife predators, cats, rats, mongooses, those follow people and their food. Fire, this might be from campfires, and you know the damage that fires can cause, and also invasive species. And final challenge, I think, is the issue of management and control. The number of visitors, what kind of payment system, how is it going to work, what are the activities of visitors and other people who might access the trail, and what's the organizational capacity. And our capacity at the JCDT, despite what might seem like a relatively large budget, and most of that is actually capital expenditure, particularly in years when we might have had building development. Our capacity, we have 25 members of staff, maybe about 10 or more of those are at the recreation areas, and another 7 or so in terms of our park rangers. So really we have a small staff. That's a big concern for us. So in conclusion, there are definitely opportunities, but they must be planned and carefully organized to have real positive impacts and to reduce the negative impacts. You must ensure that all the challenges are addressed in a creative, strategic, and very practical way. And so Janelle mentioned the Blue Mountains Trails Project Jamaica, and this is built on the interest of many people who love hiking and the Blue Mountains. And we have started work on it. And partly this is to address the issue of capacity, where JCDT recognizes we don't have enough internally, but if we partner with others, great things can be done. And I'll stop there and we can move on to the next person on the panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Tulakan. That was very, very interesting. I'm sure everybody enjoyed that presentation. And now we invite our second presenter, Mr. Osborne Chin, to talk to us. Mr. Osborne Chin is currently the Monitoring and Evaluation Analyst in the Tourism Policy and Monitoring Branch of the Ministry of Tourism. Mr. Chin has been employed to the ministry for over 12 years and previously served in the capacity of Director, Tourism Facilitation since 2012. Mr. Chin holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Geography from the University of the West Indies and has a strong background and extensive experience in environmental and natural resource management, climate change, and disaster risk management. Mr. Chin has been responsible for driving the Ministry of Tourism's sustainability portfolio for the past decade, which includes developing policies and strategies focused on sustainable tourism, environmental stewardship, climate change adaptation, disaster resilience. Mr. Chin was also instrumental in the development of the ministry's ecotourism guidelines for caves and trails, and is an avid sportsman, having played numerous sports, including cricket, basketball, and football. He's also a professional photographer, and so you know he enjoys hiking and taking pictures. Mr. Chin.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ainsley. Thanks so much for that. Good evening, everyone. Let me just check to see if everyone can hear me.
We can.
Yes, loud and clear.
Perfect, perfect.
It's hearing me.
All right, so good evening again, fellow panelists and participants. I must say that I'm quite pleased to have been selected as a panelist on this very important and interesting initiative being put on by the Natural History Society and the JCDT. This project, the Blue Mountain Jamaica Trail Project, is very promising, and we at the Ministry of Tourism, we are quite excited to learn more about the project, as well as to potentially partner in its execution and implementation. And as we've heard in the introductions and from Dr. Otukon, the project is mainly focused on restoring, repairing, and maintaining trails in and around the Blue Mountains. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a physical PowerPoint presentation, as I was told that the format would be more the panelists sharing their views and thoughts on the topic. However, what I will do is to talk briefly about the Ministry of Tourism's interests in developing and maintaining trails in Jamaica for recreational and tourism purposes. So just to give a little bit of a background, the Ministry of Tourism, we do recognize that ecotourism is an ideal complement to the management of national parks and protected areas. We understand that they are both intrinsically linked in terms of its natural and cultural heritage. And we also know that ecotourism and the components are located in protected or ecologically sensitive areas. And so we have developed some ecotourism guidelines. It was developed mainly for cockpit country. However, they do extend beyond cockpit country and into the, the, the other regions across Jamaica, other forest regions across Jamaica. And so these trail guidelines, they serve some main purposes. One is to provide our agencies or regulatory agencies with the different decision criteria for assessing permits and licenses for applications for tourism operations and activities, which includes hiking and tours on trails and the use of trails for recreational purposes. And we also look to support the continued cooperation between the relevant agencies of government, NGOs, local communities, tour operators, and other educational institutions as it relates to trail management and trail development. And so these guidelines, uh, give me one quick second. So what the guidelines do in a nutshell is that they set the tone for trail development in forest areas, particularly in protected areas, such as the Blue Mountain National Park. Um, so we know that in Jamaica, trails have been used for decades for a wide variety of purposes, and of course, we also know that most trails. Uh, One second. We know that most trails are likely to be found in the forest areas of the island, and these form connections between communities, as we heard Ainsley said earlier. And historically, the trails were used, as we know, by our ancestors, the Maroons, the Tainos, as well as locals, to get from one place to the next. And the Maroons, in particular, established a number of trails as part of their battle strategy when fighting the British. And so they do have quite a bit of historical importance. And so, in developing trails for tourism, these components are very important in the development of these trails. So going forward, the the trail guidelines essentially they have quite a number of different purposes, as I mentioned earlier. One second, I think I'm having a little bit of issue with my microphone. All right, there we go. Okay, so as I said earlier, the guidelines themselves have been produced as a part of a broader ecotourism strategy and guidelines for Jamaica. Um, they support what we call in the ministry more environmentally friendly sustainable development or sustainable tourism development. Uh, and the development of trails as a tourism resource. This will be done through a number of different agencies across government as well as NGOs. And so these agencies will have direct responsibility for their management, conservation of resources within these areas. And so going forward, the guidelines will be useful for potential ecotourism operators that have a vested interest in developing trails for tourism. And the guidelines themselves, they cover the management, the development of trails, and they also provide the different actions to be taken by both the operators of the trails as well as the users of the trails. And so there's a whole legal framework that govern the use of trails as well as its associated guidelines. And so these guidelines are put forward specifically to 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 provide for the sustainable use of the different types of trails. So you may have like a well-used trail. You might have a trail that is not suitable for maybe a large number of persons, while you might have a trail that is widely used. And so these guidelines will set the tone for the different types of trails, how they're supposed to be used, etc. Uh, the guidelines themselves are directed towards the commercial use of trails for recreation and tourism purposes. However, the specific guidelines for trail use, they're expected to be applied to all recreational trails across Jamaica, and it is expected that the guidelines themselves will be embedded in the culture in the current system of protected areas, as well as the legal statutes with the jurisdiction of the protected areas. Um, we do know that in developing these guidelines, like I said before, they have to be done in an environmentally sustainable way. And so the development of the tourism resources in the Blue and Jonker Mountains, for example, it has to be done in a way that protects the natural resources, but at the same time, it has to provide or encourage high return investments, which provide social, economic, and environmental benefits while adding to the diversity of the tourism product, and enhancing the livelihoods of the local communities. And so the primary aim is to encourage the safe and sustainable development and the management of trails. And the guidelines themselves have been developed for recreational use, but at the same time, it is to allow the agencies of government who issues these ecotourism permits to be able to provide that decision-making criteria for the assessment um, of these applications. And so, in a nutshell, that is basically what the Ministry of Tourism is trying to do. Uh, in terms of the guidelines themselves, though, the guidelines themselves, they look at quite a number of different things. They look at the sustainability of trails. They look at the ecological sustainability, the economic sustainability. Look at how you manage education and information. It also looks at the legal and institutional framework of trail development. It looks at the existing trails that we have, and it also looks at creating new trails. So it gives guidelines for creating new trails, and it also looks at things like construction and trail building, things like how you keep water off the trail, for example. Um, all of these things are discussed in detail in these guidelines. It also looks at maintenance and signage, which is very, very important in the context of tourism development. And so going forward, what the Ministry of Tourism will be doing is that we will be going back to these stakeholders, National Environment and Planning Agency, the Forestry Department, to see how these guidelines can be embedded as a part of the regulatory process, in in particularly in the granting of licenses and permits to use trails. So that, in a nutshell, is what the Ministry of Tourism has done and continues to do. And so I hope this has provided some amount of light as to the recreational aspect of trail development. Um, so thank you so much. I think I will stop there for now.
All right, thank you so much, Osborne. That was very enlightening. All right, I'll now introduce our third presenter, Mr. Peter Dolan. Mr. Dolan has served on the staff of the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference since 2013 and as a trail program manager since 2019. After graduating from Bucknell University and Australia's James Cook University with a degree in field zoology, he held a variety of outdoor positions: educator in the San Bernardino Mountains of California, river guide in Lake Superior and the Boundary Waters, and a full-time trail builder in both Arizona and New York State. Along the way, he has spent many years working on expanding outdoor opportunities for people with physical, cognitive, and developmental disabilities, as well as veterans, educated youth, and people experiencing the outdoors for the first time. In his current position, he supervises and manages the team of program coordinators and professional trail builders that allow the Trail Conference to successfully execute programs and projects across over 100 land management units and 2,150 linear trail miles. In addition to this role, he is also a sitting member of the NJDEP's New Jersey Trails Council, the chief consulting trail designer for the Blue Mountains Trail Project, board member of the Inwood Hill Park Conservancy, and a past primary speaker at the International Trail Symposium. Good afternoon and welcome, Mr. Peter Dolan. Look forward to hearing from you.
Yep, thank you so much. So my role, I know that New York and New Jersey are pretty far from Jamaica, but I hope that I can help out the project by connecting your needs with experts from the field where I work in the United States and especially in the New York City metro area. So my goal is to, whenever you have questions, whether it's from looking from a liability perspective for trail construction, technical layout and design, construction techniques, tools, recommendations, anything I can do to help, that's why I'm here. So never hesitate to reach out and see what I can do to help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen to make sure I have that ability. Great. And I'm going to put up the, oh, sorry, 1 second. Clocked up with my remote desktop here. 1 second. Okay, sorry, let's try that again. Okay, can you see the presentation there?
We can.
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. So this was the follow-up presentation after I went down to Jamaica in February of 2020. Did a walkthrough of the proposed main trail route in the Blue Mountains, and did this follow-up just with some initial thoughts, recommendations, and guidance that might be useful. So I know we want to leave lots of time for questions at the end. So I'm going to put myself here on a 5-minute timer and just quickly go through this presentation so everybody present can see what it was that we documented during that trip. And it might spur some questions for you all to ask when we have that time allocated during this evening. So I'm going to go into the presentation mode here. And here we go. Let's see what I can cover in 5 minutes. So my organization, the New Jersey Trail Conference, we are a volunteer-directed public service organization. So our job really leans heavily on volunteer involvement. So that's another thing that I hope I can bring to the project, is different ideas and ways that volunteers can be effectively integrated into trail construction management. And this presentation tonight, which again, we're just going to very quickly go through, talks about an introduction to the project, which I know you're all familiar with at this point, some maps of the site, which have already been shown by Susan, but some of the challenges that we identified during our walkthrough, recommendations, tools, and equipment that we think would really help execute some trail improvements, and ways that my organization can be of assistance to you all. So again, we'll go through this. This has all been covered, but here's some photographs. I know we haven't had as many visual components tonight. So just to remind everybody of how beautiful this area is and why it's so important to connect people here. There's some pictures there. More shots from our trip together. These are the maps that were shown earlier, but in particular, I wanted to share a few that have, let's go down 1 second too. This is one of the proposed loops that we looked at up in the Blue Mountains. And this is a brief overview of the sort of data we were collecting while out scouting. These lines, I'm sure it's very hard to see. They're going to be very small on your screen, but we collected areas where we could tell if the trail was exceedingly steep in a way that might not be sustainable, where there was evidence of landslips, of avalanches, gullies, seasonal water flow, all the sort of data-driven information we would want to have on hand to plan project timelines, budgets, and all the technical aspects of executing a public access project in this area. There's a slightly closer one you can see here where there's landslide areas identified, where certain trail structures might need to be built, where there were viewpoints that we wanted to open up, and all sorts of data along those lines. So again, I'll go quickly through here. This shows steepness along the trail, with red being very steep, and as it fades towards the pale pink being less steep. So some of the challenges we found as we walked, most of these challenges were framed in the context of whether or not the trail would be sustainable when it was built. And sustainable in this context is important because it helps us minimize the need to rebuild bits of trail as they erode over time, minimize the environmental impact, which has been alluded earlier as an important part of this project is to introduce people, but without causing undue harm to the environment. And also just to make sure people have a good experience while they're out there. So the three forces we want to be on the lookout for and minimize are compaction, displacement, and erosion, all of which serve to displace organic materials, soil, and substrate, and can lead to further damage when water flows down these channels. So again, this is more technical trail things, but the main challenges we identified had to do with overgrowth along the trail, limited viewpoints, unstable tread, steep grades as we walk, wet crossing areas, landslips, and fire. Again, several of these have been mentioned already tonight by other speakers. So here you can see the yellow line in all these pictures shows where the trail goes. And with all the growth, it can be hard to tell from some of the pictures. That line should frame things. There's an example of the current condition of the trail. And a lot of this is fairly easy just to cut back, but it gives you a sense of the work that's needed. Here we go again, pictures of the trail. We have some documentation that we use called a trail maintenance manual, and a lot of the rules, the guidelines, the tools and recommendations in that manual are going to be the same for your project. So that's an example of one document that you might want to use as a starting point when planning there. There we go. Pictures of some of the well-cleared corridors, trails that are in good shape. Here you can see areas where it's potential for a viewpoint, but there needs to be clearing to open up views, and people really want to come out and get those views instead of being in a green tunnel. So opening up viewpoints is going to be important. Here we want to avoid trail sliding down, and we have manuals and diagrams that can help guide trail workers to make structures that are going to be sustainable. So here's a picture of some volunteers cutting trail and then a diagram of where people would be walking along that flattened path. But given the steep terrain on the Blue Mountains, that's going to be a really important part building these trails. So important skills to have. Similarly, building structures to retain the trail when built is going to be a big part of anything that's done there. So we looked at some other alternative structures, some drainage, layout, and design principles. There's one view, that's my timer, one view of how steep the slope is. That yellow line shows the mountainside there. We use tools to measure grade to assess that steepness, information on water flow, suggestions for structures. Again, I'm just going to go through quickly, so any questions, please make note. I don't want to take too much time going through this in detail, but acknowledging that landslips are a big part of the environment here, and that once again, volunteers are going to be an important part, hopefully, of response teams, because that kind of maintenance will need to be ongoing from season to season. Fire is something that's very difficult to account for after it's come through. This image shows on the right, you can see based on the exposed roots from this tree, we were trying to estimate how much soil has been lost since the fire, and that nutrient poor soil that's been dried out by fire really erodes very quickly. You can't put it back once you lose it. So as a response to all that information that we found, we made some recommendations about what phases the project might look like. So phase 1 clearing, phase 2 basic construction, and phase 3 more advanced structures. So that could give a timeline for fundraising, for building skills, growing volunteer bases, and what planning might look like. So the document ends with going over tools, description of things that will be very helpful specifically to trail construction. And some things are more exotic and harder to acquire unless you really have access to technical trail vendors. So I might be able to help acquire that if necessary. And then some ideas of how the trail conference might be able to help with expertise, digital mapping solutions, things like that. And the document ends with just a list of other resources that we hope that you all can review and put to use on your project. So that's it. I don't want to take any more than my allotted time.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was a very valiant attempt at 5 minutes.
It was misguided hope, but I tried.
Nevertheless, I think you covered quite a bit of ground, and we're very grateful for the time you took to put that together. We look forward to seeing the presentation in its full detail when the results of all of this are presented. All right, at this point, I will present our fourth and final panelist, Mr. Robert Carr. Mr. Carr is a regional expert in natural resource management, community-based development, and heritage tourism. With over 3 decades of hands-on experience within the Caribbean and Latin America in supporting initiatives in protected areas, climate change adaptation, and disaster risk management, he has led the design and establishment of the first terrestrial national park in Jamaica, the Blue and Jonker National Park, which is now, as you heard, a UNESCO Cultural and Natural World Heritage Site. He has also supported the establishment of other protected areas as a part of the plan, national systems of protected areas. As a technical advisor on German-funded CARICOM projects, named the Caribbean Aquaterrestrial Project, supported the sustainable financial management of protected areas in Jamaica and 5 other organizations of Eastern Caribbean states countries. As the World Conservation Union Chief Technical Advisor for CARICOM and the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, led the execution of the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center's project for local climate adaptation measures for sustainable improvement of coastal ecosystems in St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Jamaica. Over the past 30 years, he's established and personally managed Sun Venture Tours Limited, which is an internationally recognized and award-winning company that has become a household name for professionally run hiking and nature tours in Jamaica. His academic achievements include a BSc in Fisheries and Marine Biology and Plant Protection, and a Master's in Integrated Urban and Rural Environmental Management, along with certificates in deep sea fishing and fishing gear technology and agro-ecotourism. Despite the strong focus on the marine environment, I'm sure that we will get a very interesting presentation from Mr. Carr on the prospects of trails in Blue Mountain. Robert, over to you.
Good evening, Robert.
Robert, are you there?
No, Mr. Carr, we can't hear you.
I'm
reading your lips.
Okay, we can hear you now, I think. May have been. There we go. Yep.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are now.
Okay. Well, I was saying thanks, Indra, not Ainsley, right? Thanks for the introduction, and it's a bit of a nostalgic experience for me to be talking about trails in the national park. I'd like to split what I'm going to say into 2 pieces, and I will try to stick to your time on it. The first part has to do with the big picture. The national park and this trail project is actually fitting in a national development strategy, which does not recognize sufficiently the potential of these natural areas for generating wealth, revenue, and livelihoods across the spectrum. In other words, the idea of a ridge, of a reef to ridge concept, where many of these large hoteliers can benefit and will benefit from increased traffic into our natural areas because people are still going to go and stay at the hotels. So we are in fact sitting on a gold mine in the Blue and Jonker Mountains. So that's the big picture. Outside on has to do with the details of the project and so on. But in terms of the big picture, there are three access points to the national park, which, if upgraded, can bring the volume of visitorship that would address issues of sustainability and financing. The first one is the Rio Grande Valley. The second is the uh, the Blue Mountain Peak Trail, and the third that is up to Whitfield Hall, and the third one is the Clydesdale to Syncona. Those three access points, to me, are kind of basic if we're talking about serious trail development and revenue from the trails. So right now, we have a gentleman from the ministry. We are just firefighting and playing around with this asset. If we had access proper roads, so say from Mavis Bank up to Penline Castle and from Silver Hill Gap to Syncona and likewise the Rio Grande Valley, we would have created a platform for tremendous um, well, tremendous opportunity for actually generating a kind of revenue and wealth, both for communities and for the management of the park. So that's my big statement. So if we're not getting those things understood by the government as being critical to a strong and sustained tourism program, I think we are going to be firefighting and playing around. We're not serious. I sent a link to at the start of my presentation, which I want to just focus on quickly and take you through it. And this more has to do with the practical aspects of the project. The first thing is that the trails, I don't know if you want me to share it or have you been able to open it and read. But if you can open it, you could follow me quite easily. Because sharing it might not be at the magnification that people are comfortable with. Can anybody access the document? Hello?
Yes, we're able to see the document through the
Okay.
link.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Okay. The points that are made here is what I just said. The trails constitute invaluable natural and cultural assets. Right? And the second point is that we have to move away from this conservation, this protectionist paradigm of the old, of the past. We now can get more from our natural assets while enhancing their quality. In fact, that is the way to get more. It's we have the expertise, we have the experience, we have the technology, we have the know-how to do it. And in fact, the social and economic imperatives demand that we do that. We get more from it and not lock away the resources. And we can get more at the same time and through enhancing the ecosystem and the services. And the other point is that the sustainable management, sustainable financial management has really been the Achilles heel of protected area managers. And Susan, in fact, spoke to this. The idea of finding funds for operational costs is a roller coaster for most managers. And even with donor funding, this sustainability just seems to stay out of reach of a lot of the managers. So tied to the point I made earlier, there is tremendous potential for user fees and other forms of visitor revenue to more than finance the operational needs of the park. And I'm convinced of that. But it requires the policy concept at the highest level that embraces these natural areas as an allied component of the Jamaican experience, not sea and sun and hotel by itself locked away, right? Nature shows us that all of these coastal assets are tied to what happens in the mountains, right? And in fact, the viability of tourism park is tied to what happens in the mountains. The other point I want to make was in relationship to communities. While JCDT are the administrative managers, the de facto managers of these natural areas are the communities. People who live on either side of that, who function on either side of that boundary, they are critical to this trail concept. And from this stage now, we need to begin to bring them in around the table as partners. And then on the matter of strategy, I just list some quick points. The first thing that has to be done for all of these trail areas is a resource mapping. And that resource, and I'll just come down to the bottom here with the diagram, that resource map for each trail area covers the natural living things, obviously. The natural non-living things, we have to know what is there, elements spread by. Then there is man-made history with old buildings and all of the things that are there now. And then there is the culture, the arts, and so on. All of those, each trail has to be mapped for these assets. And you assess these assets, their value, their sensitivity, and the management needs have to be described in the context of the history and current and going forward. Second thing is that I try to categorize from our own experience as a tour company, hiking tour company, 6 categories of trails suggested. One is a leave alone, access only for research and development and management. The second category is international commercial trails, something which you would put on the international market as a continuation of hiking experience within the region. And these would be priced to cover all the costs, both at the administrative level and at the fee level. The third category is overnight backpacking wilderness, 2 to 3 days. And I have put degrees of difficulty there to indicate the type of trail and what is required for someone to comfortably enjoy. And these overnight backpacking trails will have special access passes that would prescribe where the client goes and so on. Category 4, wilderness trails, for example, Blue Mountain Peak, Fish Down, these day trips, but are actually wilderness. And I've explained what wilderness is. And I'll explain what the DD means further down. Then there are the standard hiking day trip trails, for example, Sincon and Clydesdale. And last is the picnic trails. And the map is there about resource assessment. Then for key, the DD means degree of difficulty. It's all there. And what might be interesting before I close is our company used a degree of difficulty to guide types of trails and the preparation for them. And we start at 5 because for hiking trails, that you wouldn't go below 5. And at 5 is good for all ages. And it gets to the point of 8.5 to 9, which describes the level of fitness and the preparation that's required. And for wilderness, our definition here is any isolated location, 2 to 3 hours ground travel from the nearest point of help and assistance. So In closing, the trails are definitely an asset, but it has to be recognized. The potential should be recognized by the government and incorporated in the strategy, because you're talking about millions of dollars in terms of access on the road and all the other soft components of the project. But if we're serious about this trail thing not becoming more another burden on the managers, we have to get up to the policy level to say, hey, this is big money, but the returns are even greater. And those are my points. I hope I haven't stayed too long on the presentation. But thank you for having me and listening to the presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Robert. Without a doubt, your years of experience is delivering a great deal of wisdom to us here today. I think it's clear to everyone that while tourism experienced significant decline due to the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions on travel and gathering, we have all noted that there has been a surge in the adventurism, if you will, of locals. And this obviously presents an opportunity to more effectively include more nature-based activities such as hiking, which are relatively safe to do even during a pandemic. So I look forward to the discussions that we're about to have now as we open up the question and answer session. And I think the information presented by Susan on the root causes, some of the challenges and actions taken, I think the ideal cost of $750,000 US, while significant in sound, as Robert just mentioned, has the potential to deliver that much more. And recognize that while that's been ideal, the available amount has not quite reached that level. We also note the steps being taken by the Ministry of Tourism in terms of the ecotourism guidelines, the details related to requirements, and the support and cooperation and collaboration that is being encouraged. And so we know that there are opportunities and that those opportunities are recognized. For Peter, the technical trail things, as he put it, and the challenges and the challenges that he presented, as well as some of the opportunities. And I think the big takeaway from his presentation was without a doubt the volunteerism that is both required and encouraged. And obviously, as the veteran in the group, Robert has also presented a great picture of some opportunities and presented us with things to think about. All right, I know there have been some questions in the chat. And so at this point, I'm going to first give me 1 second so I can check my email, as I know that the questions have come to me and I want to ensure that I'm getting them right. So the first question was to Dr. Atuokan. What are some of the strategies being deployed to assure that ongoing community participation and creating sustainable livelihoods is a part of the project? Suzanne?
Okay, thank you for that question. So again, we have to take a big picture look and remember that this particular project that we are referencing here, the Blue Mountains Trails project, is just part of what JCDT is doing. So for example, a number of areas were mentioned: Syncona, Blue Mountain Peak Trail area, Henline Castle, Westphalia, and so on. And those are areas that JCDT, particularly over the last 3 years, has increased our focus on. And so we have a number of activities, including outreach, usually in schools. Of course, those are closed right now, but we have stepped up in terms of community outreach, through things like sustainable agriculture training. We involve local farmers in our reforestation projects and so on. So there is that with specific reference to some of the sites mentioned here. Robert Carr mentioned the Rio Grande Valley, and I should just bring in here a very important project which is building on an earlier project that ended 2020. We have a new project starting this year, which is the Maroon Communities Tourism Support Project. It's funded by the Inter-American Foundation, and it seeks to build capacity in Maroon communities, and by Maroon communities, not just Moortown, Charlestown, and Scotts Hall, but the communities between. And it focuses on helping these groups to develop the trails and the sites that they have been sharing with us that they would like to develop, and that they would like to see visitors, more visitors, and so on. So I hope that addresses how communities are being involved. So like tomorrow, a group of us are going to Scotts Hall. About a week or two ago, it was Hayfield. Another few weeks ago, other communities, there's going to be training, capacity building, etc.
All right, thank you, Susan. Now I see that Emma Lewis has her hand up, and what I'm gonna do now is allow her to ask her question, and then I'll bounce back to some other questions that came in the chat.
Okay, hi, good evening, everyone. I have one question, quick question. Would we be able to find the Ministry of Tourism's ecotourism guidelines somewhere, perhaps online, that were referred to earlier, if they're made public? My other question is, starting this week, UNESCO is going to sit down and consider which World Heritage sites are now in danger. And the Australians have been making a big fuss about the Great Barrier Reef being considered as in danger and possibly taken off the list, and they're very upset about it. But 53 UNESCO World Heritage sites are now listed in danger, and 7 others are being considered added to the list, and 2 are going to be removed altogether. And some of these heritage sites are under threat because of what they call over-tourism. So my question is, after all that, what measures could be taken to limit the number of visitors? How is that going to be handled? And is that considered, one of the challenges, possible challenges, so that we don't end up on the heritage sites in danger list or even delisted? Thank
All right,
you.
thank you very much, Emma.
Let's
first
say something on that.
To answer the question about the guideline document.
No, then what Emma said about visitors. About tourism, impact of tourism.
Yes, I meant limiting the number of visitors.
Right,
how would you control that?
I want to comment on that.
Okay, Robert. Let's allow Osborne to answer the question about the guideline first, and then we will take Robert's input on the over-tourism, and then Susan, if you have any follow-on at that point, we'll take your comment as well.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for that question. The guidelines are still in draft. We are just about ready to go back to our stakeholders for final comments. However, we can make the guidelines available for you to review and to provide comments as well. So we can do that. So I can leave my email address and you can email me, and I can send you the document.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Osborne. Robert, you wanted to comment?
Yeah. 2 things on the guidelines and then the question of visitor impact. I wonder how many times the Ministry of Tourism and TPDCO have developed ecotourism guidelines. That's been going on for at least 2 decades. But anyhow, on a different matter. Now, people can be either assets or liability. Visitors can be assets or liability. And a lot of it depends on how you manage the activity of visitors within the park. Now, concrete roads into those 3 areas would allow ease of access of many persons, not necessarily to the trails, but to all the attractions that could possibly occur within the cultural setting of these entry points. Certainly, Penline Castle in itself is an attraction, and several hundred people can be accommodated in those areas between the different lodges and the activities and so on. Right? So you regulate by access, payment and access. People would need to reserve. It can't be an open thing. So you can manage, but what you want is for people hassle-free, without risk to life and limb, to be able to get into the communities bordering the park and to be able to use these trails. The JCTT has invested a lot of money in Portland Gap, right? Which they will need funds to maintain that. The present visitorship and access is not going to be adequate to maintain those things. So I'm saying proper access points to allow volume will certainly bring the kind of revenue more than needed for management. And when I say people are assets or liabilities, you want to convert, as Mr. Dolan said, convert people's activity in and around the park into voluntary or in-kind support. So you can have events and days that are focused on support in management. So those are my 2 couple points.
All right, thank you, Robert. Suzanne, anything to
Yeah.
add?
So thanks for making that point, Emo. It's a big issue for World Heritage, and it's like tourism is this double-edged sword for World Heritage sites. But luckily for us, and maybe I really shouldn't say it because maybe you'll all stop coming to Holywell, but here's a secret. Holywell is not within the World Heritage Site. So that's one. Neither is most of the Rio Grande Valley that has been mentioned, and several of the other areas and the communities around the Blue and John Crow Mountains. So one of the things that JCDT has been working with communities to do is to look at, because these communities are part of the Blue and John Crow Mountains. They might not be within the national park, but we're trying to work with local communities to enhance the trails that exist within those areas outside of the national park and World Heritage Site. And we're trying to work with them in ways that the national park will still benefit through a whole network process and online booking and so on that we're working with them on. So we think that's one thing. So that, as Robert Carr was saying, you might have concrete roads to some of these sites. And I guess he's saying concrete because to reduce the challenges with the high rainfall in the area. But the idea is to open up other areas that will benefit local communities to reduce the negative impact that some of those communities are having on the national park. We will have to be very serious about how people use the sites. And that's another good thing about this project, because what we're trying to do is to develop the appreciation and the capacity of individuals who are interested, whether members of the Natural History Society, students who are still at university, whether they're studying environmental management cultural heritage or something totally different. We're trying to involve them as volunteers so they can get the experience of taking care of nature.
I thank you very much, Suzanne. Okay, the next question is a two-part question and wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but I think multiple members of the panel can answer this one. I think first we'll ask Peter to give his input, as he's had so much experience in a more developed, if you will, trail kind of context. The question is, are there any opportunities to turn negative impacts and challenges into positive and sustainable revenue generating opportunities? And how might partnerships and collaborations help in mitigating these impacts and turn them into sustainable opportunities? So Peter, if you will, first, and then afterwards I'd ask Suzanne to weigh in as well.
Sure. So there was one thing I put a little bit in the comments just about how sustainability as a term, really what sustainability means is something able to sustain the use that it's getting. So you can have a trail that gets 10 people a year and becomes damaged because you're walking through moss or wetlands or sensitive habitat. Or you could have a trail that sees 10,000 people a year with no damage because it's built in a way that is designed to accommodate those people. So one way that we can take some of these challenges and turn them into opportunities is by looking at where damage is being caused, finding out if that is because of more interest than the project can sustain. Can we use that to promote the project, generate interest, and make a compelling case for more resources going towards the improvement to bring it to that sustainability level? And I just want to make sure, so there were several questions. Is that approaching the topic you wanted answered, or?
Yes, I think that's a good first step. Suzanne, anything to add?
No, I think that's a very important point, or points that Peter made, because more and more, well, since the last many years, natural resource managers are looking not so much at carrying capacity as a one number, only this number of people can visit this site. It's really more about how do you manage the people, and not only how do you manage the people, but how do you build the infrastructure and maintain the infrastructure to accommodate those people. And of course, you will have to have different types of trails, different types of access, some areas where it will be a totally wilderness experience. And right now, for many Jamaicans, it's not something they will be interested in. Already, as it is, Portland Gap, Blue Mountain Peak Trail, people are horrified to get there and find that, there's no electricity, no hot water, outside toilets. And personally, I hope that's the way it's going to remain. There are many, many trails like that internationally, international standard, because they're meant to be wilderness trails.
I have to tell you, Susan, I'll have to said that just now, because it's funny that Jamaicans would find the lack of electricity funny, considering that some communities in Jamaica still have a problem. Nonetheless, a final opportunity for anybody else on the panel to weigh in on this particular.
Ainsley, I'd like to
Go ahead, Robert.
Make a comment. And Susan, you may not know, but I take off my hat to you for having carried the Olympic torch around the track so many times. I know it's not easy. But my quick comment is when you look at the budget for the national park, the sources of income, if I recall correctly, the vast amount of the funds are coming from donors. And tell me if I'm wrong, Susan, but that's what I recall. Now, what I'm trying to get at is that there needs to be a paradigm shift at the highest level of government in terms of development strategy, which treats these areas that treat them in a way that reflect their real potential to the industry, to development of communities. Because believe you me, these things can transform the livelihood of communities. Many of them are agro-based communities, and when you merge that with ecology and tourism, you get a tremendous product. So I'm saying, Susan, firefighting is good and dealing with this thing, but if you want this thing to be professionally done and raised to a level, it needs a shift in the way that these areas are positioned. And we can take the volume without destroying it. As I say, we have the knowledge, the expertise now to enhance the quality of the ecosystems and at the same time get more. Those are my closing comments.
All right, thank you, Robert. I think, and as Osborne hasn't spoken yet, that actually segues nicely into the next question, which is beyond government funding, what other opportunities will be pursued to assure a reliable and consistent flow of funding to support the ongoing maintenance of the trail? Now, I mentioned Osborne since it seemed that Robert was also asking Osborne to comment a little on that. But I think that's a question also for you, Susan. So if Osborne wishes to speak, then he can now. But then afterwards, I would say, Susan, can you take that?
Uh, uh, Very quickly, Ainsley. Well, from the ministry standpoint, we are more focused on government funding. So going forward, we will be trying our best to utilize the Tourism Enhancement Fund to to push the funding of these opportunities and these initiatives. So I'm not so sure what other opportunities for non-government funding currently exists out there. So maybe Susan can shed some more light on that.
Right. So I think that the question was asking what apart from government funding, what else? But the reality, as Robert was pointing out from my presentation, is that actually government funding of the national park is relatively limited. And therefore, I would support what Robert is saying, that there needs to be some changes at a very high level of government to see these sites for what they could really contribute to our economy and so on, and maybe to see it in a little bit differently. We're used to thinking of, so in order to develop our economy, we need to build 10, 300 or 1,000 room high-rise hotels. No, that's not the type of development that we're talking about. We're talking about stretching the development across several communities in guest houses, bed and breakfast, small resorts, villas, and that sort of thing, in a way that concentrates and really benefits these local communities, which would then have a ripple effect throughout the economy. So we do need, I think, to change that. I'm not sure. Maybe we need to change our approach. Ainsley and Osborne, maybe you can give us some help there as to how we change minds higher up the political rungs. But one of the other things, though, is that JCDT is looking at for managing the park in terms of sustainability. The reality is we do have to seek, and there are a lot of opportunities for donor-funded projects. So it makes sense for us to spend time to write the proposals and get that funding. Meanwhile, we're developing longer-term actions such as sustainable tourism, carbon trading, and other big picture programs.
All right, thank you,
Yeah.
Susan. Um, I'm gonna. I do think that's a very good answer, and certainly I believe there's an opportunity for engaging with government at a higher level in terms of what is currently available and linking what could accrue from additional investment in terms of sustainability and development. Um, while we're on that topic, however, I think some of the points you raised related to the communities segues also nicely into a question from Andrew Smith, which is, he says that I live in the buffer zone of the park where there are trails used by local farmers and hunters. If local communities want to develop such trails for tourism, what is the process? I'm going to ask between Osborne and Suzanne, since, Suzanne, you're the manager for the area, and Osborne, since you're the government regulator in this instance, that you guys take this question.
Osborne, you want to go ahead first, or?
I would say that is a
About
very
the,
good
you know, community
question,
tourism.
Andrew.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. I do believe that NEPA, NEPA is the one that generally gives the ecotourism permit for these activities. So I would recommend that you make contact with NEPA and TPDCO regarding whatever proposal you have, and then they would best guide you. Now, in terms of developing the trail, whether it's an existing trail, then that is where our guidelines would come in. However, those guidelines are not yet ratified and fully accepted by our regulatory agencies. So I'm not quite sure exactly how those persons would go about, but I would recommend that you speak to TPDCO and NEPA going forward.
Thanks, Ozzy. Suzanne?
So to add to that, of course, government, the Ministry of Tourism does have a community tourism policy and guidelines, and I believe that becomes operational through the Tourism Product Development Company. And I know that they're working closely with the Jamaica Social Investment Fund, and in particular their READY project, Rural Economic Development Initiative. And whilst under that project, they have a particular focus on projects and particular sites, they are able to provide guidance and assistance. I would say both through TPDCO and the JCIF Ready project. But in addition, so just to explain a little bit how JCDT tries to work with our communities, and we do try to focus on those around the Hollywell area, Rio Grande Valley, and the Peak Trail area. So to give an example, the community in Hayfield, St. Thomas, which is where the Kuna Pass Trail starts, well, depending which side you go from. But we have been saying to them, what do you have on your side closer to Hayfield and the community below it, Castle Hill? And it turns out that they have an amazing ruin of a coffee plantation, Great House. And it's made, I thought it was limestone, huge limestone, stones, cut stone, but I now understand it's actually marble that was hewn from the area. And so it's a fascinating space. And so what JCDT then did was to bring in the National Heritage Trust, TPDCO, and the other agencies, and they have been able to get assistance that way. They actually, I think, have some permission from the National Land Agency. They're getting the support from the Social Development Commission officers. And there's a new group, the St. Thomas Renaissance Foundation, that is providing support, as well as JCDT will be providing support through our new project. So that's one way to go, is to reach out, as Osborne also was saying, to some of the agencies.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. That's a lot of information. I think Andrew's question was very properly answered there. All right, the next question we have is, can can the panel share more on how the project is being aligned to sustainable development and the other global goals? And what are the plans regarding safety and security on the trails? Susan, again, I think this is primarily you.
Yeah, I would love to throw that back at, I'd love to pick on Paul Sully if he's around, just to show that we have, you know, other people, because I see a question here about the current level of volunteer help received by the Blue and Jonquil Mountains, and also to say that, of course, the Ministry of Tourism, through the Tourism Enhancement Fund, has been providing significant capital expenditure support for development within the national park. But our real challenge is day-to-day operational funding. But again, just to say that everything that the national park does is aligned to the Millennium Development Goals and the various sustainable development plans in Jamaica. But Paul, I'm not seeing you, and I would like
I'm
to
here.
put you on the spot.
Yeah,
So
I'm here.
Paul, some of you will know, is the recently retired, not so recently anymore, retired US Peace Corps director, Jamaica director, and he is one of our volunteers working on this trails project, as well as the one that I mentioned with the maroon communities.
Right. So if I may just take 2 minutes on this, I think that a theme of Robert Carr's has been about engaging local participants. And I think that when we go out there, the little bit, of course, we have the expertise of Susan herself, the rangers, David Walters, park manager. We have trail standards, Peter's input, others that have various levels of construction of trails. And there's a combination there that we look at, and safety and security is a big issue for us. So, you know, to say what is the standard? Well, we apply the applicable standards that we have for the trail in question. And what the few trails that we've gone out and walked, they were similar in that the overgrowth was quite substantial. One, we tried to go from Clydesdale to Morse's Gap and got stuck in some very, very heavy overgrowth. In fact, Conleaf, who's also on this group here, was part of that team. I thankfully was on another team that took the easy route over to Syncona, a different route from Clydesdale. But either way, in all of it, we're very conscientious about safety procedures, even how we hike, what the equipment is, if we intend to camp, that we have adequate water and all this in terms of safety, security. That's us under development. And then you've seen standards. Well, one of the things Peter has shared is creating the standards for a trail that not only are okay for the environment or preserve the environment, but for the people on them in terms of head coverage and they're wide enough. So this is something that we're going to continue to develop as is appropriate in terms of the standards for Jamaica. We will adopt the international standards as is appropriate and then adapt them to Jamaica where we have to do that as well. Let me stop there. But we do have depth on the bench here. Another person on the call here, Mark Travang, hiking enthusiast, former Peace Corps volunteer in Jamaica. He'll be here for 3 weeks doing a trail and hiking consultancy and lending his expertise as a volunteer, I should add. And there's Mark saying hi to those who can see his picture. Thanks, Mark.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. And thank you very much as well, Mark, for the volunteerism. We appreciate it. All right. I see where there's another question related to I'm trying to find it in the chat. I'm sorry. What is the current level of volunteer help received by Blue and Jonquil Mountain National Park? Suzanne?
Well, I was hoping that by pointing out Paul Sully and his contribution, and he introduced Mark Trabing, who's a former Peace Corps volunteer, who's going to be with us in a couple of weeks, and other people on this call. Conley Simpson is here, and there are a number of others who are part of the Blue and Jonquil Mountains National Park Volunteer Corps. And we have really fully established, I see Abby Horton as well. She's our volunteer coordinator. And so we do have a number of volunteers who are not only assisting with, particularly at Hollywell, because we're using Hollywell as a kind of training ground for the volunteers in terms of trail, what was the word that Robert Carr had used? Resource mapping of trails, being able to assess trails and help to maintain trails, and also visitor management. That's something I don't recall if Peter Dolan had mentioned, but that's very important. You know, directing people and discouraging them from certain activities and helping to educate them about the trails. So I'm not sure if I could say the level. I think we maybe have close to 100 people listed, but maybe only about 30 or 40 of them are actively involved, and we continue to reach out and do training to involve them in our work. Hope that answers Paul. Oh, and then it's Paul Ward, so UTEC community service volunteers still very much exist and helping quite a lot at Hollywell, and I think we're being able to use them much more effectively also.
All right, thank you very much, Susan. I think that does indeed, shed some light on the situation. And again, it's clear that there's been some reasonable support from international sources, and we thank them for it. But I'm very happy to hear that there is some local support in terms of volunteerism as well. All right, we're approaching the end of the time that has been allocated, but the last question that I would that I see that I will put forward is, and this one seems related to either Suzanne or Osborne, depending on who's able to do it. I see in the last 5 or 10 years, how much financial support has the national park received from TEF/TPDCA? I'm certainly not expecting a very specific number, but more like a general statement.
Yeah, I would just say it's been particularly for infrastructural development. So at Portland Gap, Robert Carr spoke about the investment there, Portland Gap, and all the way, well, at the peak, although some of that has been with the Jamaica Social Investment Fund and also the Sandals Foundation. But there's quite a bit of funds has been put into infrastructural development there, and also at Hollywell with our Discovery Center, gift shop, and cafe. So it has not really been towards operational support, but mostly capital expenditure, which is, I guess, expected to help you to generate more income.
I thank you for that answer. I think at this point, we will begin to wrap things up. Let me take this opportunity yet again to thank all of our presenters, Dr. Susan Atuakan, who is the Executive Director of the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust, Mr. Osborne Chin, who is the Monitoring and Evaluation Analyst in the Tourism Policy and Monitoring Branch of the Ministry of Tourism, Mr. Peter Dolan, who is obviously a man of much skill in terms of trail development and trail management, currently working with the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. Mr. Robert Carr, with in excess of 30 years experience in the field of ecotourism generally, and also in natural resource management. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the people responsible for this discussion today, which is the Natural History Society of Jamaica and the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust. And of course, thank you all for participating here with us. The questions were very interesting, and I think the answers were on point. And again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will now turn back over to Janelle in case she has any final things. Have a good evening. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Henry. So we're now winding down the session. Thank you again, everyone, for being in attendance. I just want to bring everyone's attention to the links that might be in the chat that are helpful, which are a few links that Mr. Dolan entered, as well as Mr. Carr's supporting document. We'd also like to bring your attention to our flyer for our upcoming field trip. That will be a hike at Hollywell, as you can see, on the 24th of July, Saturday, and the meeting spot is available there. For those who are not comfortable traveling to Hollywell alone and maybe don't know where to go and would feel more comfortable traveling in a convoy, you can meet us here at this time and we'll all travel up together. I think that might be it on our end. If Mr. Paul Sully is still around, if you'd like to briefly speak on the next steps probably for the Blue Mountains Trail Project Jamaica, that would be great.
Great, I'm here. And I'd love to just take a couple of minutes to talk to you all about the Blue Mountains Trails Project. Janelle had talked about the focus at the onset of the panel conversation. But what I want to underscore is that this is a collaboration. It is under the auspices of JCDT. They are the stewards of the park, which is, and they have concerns on the perimeter, the buffer zone area community. So much of the plans, nearly all of it, is in their area of purview, JCDT's area of purview. But there's a certain, let's call it a volunteerism ethic at work. And that is, if anybody on this call or anybody that they may know on this, at this meeting here, we're looking for groups that may be interested in coming in as a group, as a collaborator. And I want to draw on Dr. Susan's statement about organizational capacity. It's a big job, and the amount of need is astounding. And so working with groups has a priority, and groups that can be entrepreneurial. Natural History Society of Jamaica is a collaborator. Friends of Jamaica, these are former volunteers in the US, but served here in Jamaica, a collaborator. New York, New Jersey Conference, you've heard from Trail Conference, you've heard from Peter. They will be helpful in a number of ways. Art Track Foundation, small foundation that promotes, fosters this kind of activity. They are a supporter. Council of Voluntary Social Services is signed up. They've had some leadership shifts, and so they are signed up to be a collaborator, and we're still working on the levels of engagement. And so what we're trying to do is continue to put out the word, to invite, again, individuals are coming through the volunteer corps, but groups can come and approach, either write an email to Susan, or you could write an email to thetrailprojectja@gmail.com. The Trail Project JA, and I guess I could put that right here. And that gets looked at multiple times a day by yours truly. And your email will be responded to. So entrepreneurial and those that want to contribute. Oftentimes I'm asked, what do you want us to do? the question or the answer that I give is you come and spend some time with us and you tell us how you want to contribute. Now, while that's not it's an open invitation to find your interest or passion or your level of interest. Groups, teams, groups or divisions within companies that say, hey, let's do something in the mountains, let's do something around trails, they're all invited. And then we figure out how that can be put to best use. We do have, and Susan mentioned this, a management plan for the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park. It's a 10-year plan developed a few years ago up to 2027. So it's not a blank check, but it's an open invitation to come in, have a conversation, and bring ideas that you have with us. Now, for those that are already involved, we do have the National Park volunteers, some American volunteers, 5 of them, including me, Mark. There's a few more that are here and coming, and we are working on, interestingly enough, we're looking at, and some of you are going to know these places, but some were mentioned. Clarity Cottage to the Blue Mountain Peak. We're trying to look at opening that up. Well, I know Robert Carr, they mentioned your name, so I know you lead groups over that way, but from Clarity Cottage to Zincona. But we'd like to push through and make sure we could open that up all the way to the Blue Mountain Peak. Clydesdale to Blue Mountain Peak and Zincona to Blue Mountain Peak. Some of that is overlapping, but we'd like to work on those. We'd like to make sure in the next iterations that Clydesdale can be hiked as a loop. You can do out and back, point to point, as we say. Loops tend to be much more fun and interesting because you're not seeing the same thing. You're looping up and around. So technically, that's the work that we're trying to do. We are on, and my exposure to Susan's prowess in proposal writing, and I appreciated Robert Carr saying she needed an Olympic torch. I said, I told her one day, you need a raise and a trophy for all of what you do. So she writes some grants, but what we need are people to bring forth not only their ideas, but their resources. And that will make many hands make lighter the work. I do think that in terms of the trail projects, activities, we're trying to remain volunteer focused. But what I've learned over the months of working with them and prior to working with them, that the environment, the needs of the environment, the needs of land management, of which the trails is part of it, will outstrip any budget. You can't raise enough money for the work that could and should be done. So volunteerism to me is absolutely key. Now, just for those that are on the line here, volunteerism not to the exclusion of local communities paying work, but volunteer efforts that can help enhance, build that traffic, which will create economic viability in those buffer zone areas. So I'm very excited about the possibilities and the potential. I just want to give a shout out to Mr. Donaldson Bernard, a guy who has regaled me with some of his walks. He's from Windsor in the Rio Grande area, and he's a point of contact for trail development. So we're going to continue to engage local people as guides, as informants, to help them actually develop the trails. So that's just a few words on what we're trying to do with the Blue Mountains Trails project. Thanks for that opportunity.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you everyone for attending. This is the end of our session. I hope it was very informative. I hope you all left learning a lot more than you came in knowing.
Can I do a quick shout out to David Walters, National Park Manager?
Absolutely.
Big up David, because he has really been the person at the forefront of this particular project.
Shout out to you, David. Thanks for all that you do. Yeah. All right, everyone. So take care. Have a pleasant rest of your evening / night. Enjoy your dinners if you haven't already had dinner. And that's it. Okay, take care. And we'll see you all at the next event. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Take care.